This story happened to a man who wished to keep his name anonymous, so we'll call him Bob. Bob was an ordinary construction worker who had spent half his life working for a construction company. He built homes in the suburbs for private clients. After 20 years, he reached the rank of senior builder, managing all the workers and overseeing the job. Bob also did repairs and maintenance on old houses. Because of that, he often found himself working in places that were completely falling apart. He would also frequently spend the night in those houses, since they were often too far from his own home or the office. He'd send the crew to a motel while he stayed behind to clean up and get the house ready for the next day of work. Old houses often make all kinds of strange noises, so Bob had gotten used to the eerie atmosphere. But this house was different. In the neighborhood he was working in, every house was occupied, except one. It was an old house that looked completely abandoned. It always attracted the attention of local kids because of how creepy it looked. They'd run around it pretending someone lived there, but clearly, the house had been empty for a long time. Bob was working in the house across the street from it. The owners had gone on vacation to Los Angeles, but hired contractors to renovate the place before they left. Bob was in charge, and on the first day under his supervision, a lot of garbage was cleared and the old furniture taken apart. Bob sent the crew to a motel while he stayed behind to finish cleaning. He planned to sleep on an old couch the owners had asked to throw out. By 8 p.m., Bob was alone in the house and decided to eat something. Since it was dirty inside, he stepped out onto the porch to eat in the fresh air. That's when he noticed the house across the street for the first time. An old, abandoned wooden house. They don't build them like that anymore. Vines on the walls, overgrown bushes and lawn, and a front door that clearly hadn't been opened in ages. Trash and dirt had piled up beneath it. It was already getting dark outside, but that house looked terrifying no matter the lighting. It gave Bob a strange feeling, as if someone was watching him. He ate his food, smoked a cigarette, and went back inside. He needed to prepare his sleeping area. Bob liked spending the night in his clients' homes because it helped him connect more deeply with his work. He became a resident of the house for a few days and could feel what needed fixing and what might bother the owners. He set up his sleeping space, pulled out a book, and started reading. But at 10 p.m., he heard a scream. It came from outside, and Bob figured it was just kids playing. By midnight, Bob was already asleep. But his sleep didn't last long. Just half an hour later, he woke up. That night, it was unusually cold outside. Bob got up to grab another blanket from his truck. As he approached the front door, he noticed a light on in the window across the street. Was someone living in that creepy house? Bob stepped outside and opened his truck, but his attention was completely focused on the house across the road. How could anyone live in such conditions? He went back inside and laid down again, but uneasy thoughts began creeping into his mind, making it hard to fall asleep. Bob got up and went to the kitchen to get some water. He filled a glass and drank it almost in one gulp. Again, his eyes were drawn to the house across the street. A light was on inside, and there was an old woman standing in the window. She was staring directly at Bob without looking away. Bob stood still, just staring back. He almost forgot he was holding a glass in his hand. The woman looked very strange, unkempt, with dirty hair. That was about all Bob could make out. She just stood there, staring. Suddenly, something fell behind Bob. He turned around and saw a knife had fallen from the table. When he looked back out the window, the light in the house across the street was off. The house once again looked as though it had been abandoned for decades. Bob walked over to the couch and realized he probably wouldn't be able to sleep. That night was very unusual for Bob, who now felt like a child alone in a scary house. Or rather, the house itself wasn't scary, but the one next door wouldn't leave his mind. Who was living there? Bob laid down and closed his eyes. Eventually, he managed to fall asleep. But his dream was horrifying, and at 3 a.m., he woke up. Someone was banging loudly on the front door. Bob jumped up, confused, not knowing what was happening or where he was. After a few seconds, he came to his senses and remembered he was spending the night in someone else's home. He got up and went to the front door. He opened it, but no one was there. However, the house across the street was still standing in its place, and there was a light on inside. Bob stared straight ahead into the window of that house. He tried to see what was going on inside, but the glass was very dirty. Bob took a few steps forward, and suddenly, the door behind him slammed shut. The light across the street stayed on. Bob tried to open the front door several times, but it wouldn't budge. That's when he noticed the light in the other house went out, and from inside his house, the one he couldn't get back into, he heard footsteps. What the hell? He backed away, confused and terrified. Someone was definitely in the house. Someone was walking toward the front door. Without thinking twice, Bob ran to the neighbors and called the police. By the time the cops arrived, there was no one in the house. No traces, no signs of entry. Bob insisted that someone had been in the house across the street acting strangely, but the sheriff assured him that no one had lived in that house for a long time. It had belonged to an elderly woman who passed away 8 years ago. Since then, the house had been empty. Bob was certain he saw a light inside. The sheriff knocked on the door but didn't go in. It seemed like he didn't even want to deal with it. He clearly didn't believe Bob. The next day, the construction crew returned. But Bob never again spent the night in someone else's home. He kept remembering that night. I was never afraid of staying home alone. I'm 27, and I live in a single-story house with a 2-car garage in the suburbs of Milwaukee. It's a quiet neighborhood, typical middle class. Fences, flags on doorsteps, identical mailboxes, and lawns that are better taken care of than the kids. On Friday, my girlfriend left to visit her parents for the weekend. I stayed home alone, and honestly, I was kind of glad. I grabbed a burger, some beer, turned on a show, and sprawled out on the couch. I fell asleep right in front of the TV. I woke up because the house was too quiet. You know that kind of silence where it feels like someone turned down the volume on the whole world? No sounds from outside, no wind, no footsteps upstairs, nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the soft glow from the screen, which had already gone into standby mode. It was 2 in the morning. I got up to get some water. Everything in the kitchen was in its place. I opened the fridge and took a few sips from a bottle, and that's when I heard it for the first time. A click. A faint metallic one, like someone locked something or turned a doorknob. I froze, listening. Another click. And then, a moment later, I heard a footstep. A very clear, slow step on concrete. My garage floor is concrete. I recognized that sound instantly. The problem was, I hadn't heard the garage door open. I was barefoot, standing in the middle of the kitchen, staring into the darkness at the end of the hallway. I had turned off all the lights before going to sleep, except for the TV. The garage is at the far end of the house, past the laundry room. If someone was there, they were already inside. I grabbed a knife. My first thought was that someone was robbing me. My heart was pounding like a drum. I went to the window and looked outside. Quiet. Only one neighbor across the street had a light on in their window. The rest of the houses were dark. I looked at my garage door. It was closed. I remembered opening it last night, but it had stayed shut all day. I couldn't figure out how someone could have gotten in. Every door was locked, but there was definitely someone in the garage. I dialed 911 but didn't hit call yet. I didn't want to panic if it was just, say, a cat or the wind. But deep down, I knew it wasn't the wind. I decided to check the garage. Against my better judgment, I opened the door leading into it and quickly flipped on the light. No one was there. I stepped inside. Just my car. And a wrench lying on the floor. Must have fallen and made that sound I heard earlier. I turned off the light and went to the living room. It was getting late, so I headed to my bedroom. In the dark hallway, I stopped by an old photo on the wall. It was a picture of me as a kid with my grandma. I don't know why I paused to look at it, but I felt something weird. I remembered how Grandma always used to tell me to be careful. Her words echoed in my mind. I started to feel a little anxious, uncomfortable standing in the dark like that, so I went to my room. There was nothing to worry about. I had checked the garage. I got into bed, but I couldn't fall asleep for a while. My mind was racing with thoughts. By 3 a.m., I was out cold. Nothing could have woken me up. But at 4 a.m., I suddenly woke up with an intense feeling of anxiety. It felt like someone else was in the house with me. I grabbed my phone and walked to the light switch. The lights didn't turn on. It seemed like the power was out in the entire house. I stepped into the dark hallway and turned on the flashlight on my phone. Immediately, I smelled something awful. I can't even describe it. Like someone had opened an old cellar full of mold. I headed toward the basement door, but then I heard something behind me. A noise. What was that? Something falling? Or did I imagine it? I shined the light down the hallway but didn't see anything out of place. I needed to get to the basement and turn the power back on. But just as I approached the door, I heard another sound. I turned and started walking toward the living room, taking slow steps through the silent, pitch-black house. I had this strange, uncomfortable feeling, a deep sense of dread. I entered the living room and saw a backpack lying on the floor. My backpack. It was open. Right then, I heard another noise. Something fell in the garage. In that moment, it all came rushing back to me, the noises from before I went to bed. I slowly approached the door that led to the garage. I stood still, listening. Silence. Someone was trying to force door open. They were yanking on it, hard. I had no idea what to do. I just pressed my back against the door. I called 911 and told them someone had broken into my house. And then suddenly, everything went quiet. The garage was silent again, as if no one had ever been there. I slowly backed away from the door and stood there, staring at it. I stood like that for about 5 minutes. Then the police arrived. An officer knocked on the front door. I let him in and told him someone was in my garage. He drew his gun and opened the door. There was no one inside. Just a broken window on my car, my things scattered across the floor, and the garage door wide open. The police searched the whole house, but they never found anyone. That's when I realized I had forgotten to close the garage door properly earlier. The intruder had hidden inside my car before I went to sleep. I just hadn't noticed, and I don't even want to imagine what would have happened if I had. They never found him. Hi everyone, my name is David, and I want to tell you a story that happened to me 10 years ago. At the time, my friend Simon and I loved sneaking into hard-to-reach places. Abandoned buildings, construction sites, even a deserted missile base. The sewer, that was the last place we ever explored. Why the last? Because Simon and I almost died there. I want to share this story mainly to warn you about what happened to us that night. The longest night of my life. That day, we already knew where we were going. Simon had found the spot and told me it would make an amazing story. We were supposed to enter through an old drainage pipe and get into the sewer system. I was young and stupid. I didn't understand how dangerous it really was. We were both craving an adrenaline rush. Simon came over to my house and we started packing our things. We put dry clothes, a lighter, and 2 spare flashlights in a backpack. We also had flashlights attached to special belts. We got our gear ready and set out around 11 p.m. It was an old drainage pipe that hadn't been used in a long time. We reached it by the time it was already midnight. The pipe was in a wooded area with a small clearing. It jutted out of a little hill and led underground. We put on gloves, turned on our flashlights, and went inside. The smell was disgusting, even though the pipe hadn't been used for waste in years. We followed the route we'd read about on the internet. First a long, straight path. Then we were supposed to come to a fork. We needed to go right to reach the central part of the district's sewer system. It was very cramped and dark down there, but what bothered us the most was the smell. At the time, I didn't realize that we could have died just from suffocating, but luckily that didn't happen to us. We kept going, deeper and deeper. I don't even know what we were hoping to find. but it felt so exciting and thrilling to be in a place like that. The adrenaline. But this place felt more grim than anything else. The confined space gave me the feeling that the farther we went, the narrower the tunnel became. Or was it actually getting narrower? I was walking in front, and at some point I started hearing strange noises. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" Simon replied. "Something's creaking." For some reason, I was the only one who heard it. Simon didn't hear anything. Eventually, we reached a part of the sewer that was actually still operational. It was fully functioning, and the stench was unbearable. There were real rivers of waste flowing there. The most important thing was not to fall in. We had respirators with us and immediately put them on. That was supposed to protect us from dangerous gases, but the smell didn't go away. There were many branches and forks in the tunnels. We decided to walk almost all the way through the entire district, which wasn't small, and come out near our house. We planned to climb out through a manhole. And again, I heard those strange sounds. A metallic scraping noise. Simon still didn't hear anything. We kept walking past those rivers, and at some point I noticed a door up ahead. I knew it would catch Simon's interest, but I didn't want to find out what was behind it. I just wanted to get back to the surface as soon as possible. But Simon noticed the door and decided to find out what was inside. He pulled on the handle, but the door was heavy, made of metal. He pulled again, harder this time, and the door opened. Damn, the smell coming from inside was even worse. We stepped in, and there were more doors ahead. Simon suggested we each take a different one so we wouldn't waste too much time there. I didn't want to go anywhere, but just to get it over with, I chose the left door. I walked in, and it was filthy inside, with someone's belongings scattered around, old shoes. I saw a card on the floor and bent down to pick it up. What the hell? Was Simon trying to mess with me? The place was creepy enough already. I picked up the card. It was a driver's license, a young guy in the photo, but around me were all kinds of old things, including women's clothing. I started hearing rustling sounds again. Probably rats, I thought. Damn, how wrong I was. I kept walking down some corridor and heard strange noises echoing from somewhere far away. I walked further, shining my flashlight in every direction to look around. Then suddenly, at the end of the corridor, I noticed something moving. I stopped and pointed my light toward it. Something was shifting, but I couldn't tell what it was. I took a few more steps forward, and then my heart froze. I heard a cough. A man was looking at me. Out of fear, I dropped my flashlight and was left in complete darkness. I heard footsteps approaching me, and I ran, blindly, back the way I came. By some miracle, I found the door and saw Simon at the exit. He was looking at me with wild, terrified eyes and said, "Let's get out of here." I still didn't know what Simon had found. We ran as fast as we could and climbed out through the first manhole we came across. I asked him what he had seen, but he just stared at me silently. To this day, he has never told me what he saw or what happened to him. But he did say that if we had stayed there a minute longer, we wouldn't have gotten out alive. After that, we never went to such dangerous places again, and Simon was never the same. Every time I try to bring it up, he completely loses his temper and tries to change the subject. What did he see? Maybe he's right. Maybe we're just not meant to know, far away. I walked further, shining my flashlight in every direction to look around. Then suddenly, at the end of the corridor, I noticed something moving. I stopped and pointed my light toward it. Something was shifting, but I couldn't tell what it was. I took a few more steps forward, and then my heart froze. I heard a cough. A man was looking at me. Out of fear, I dropped my flashlight and was left in complete darkness. I heard footsteps approaching me, and I ran, blindly, back the way I came. By some miracle, I found the door and saw Simon at the exit. He was looking at me with wild, terrified eyes and said, "Let's get out of here." I still didn't know what Simon had found. We ran as fast as we could and climbed out through the first manhole we came across. I asked him what he had seen, but he just stared at me silently. To this day, he has never told me what he saw or what happened to him. But he did say that if we had stayed there a minute longer, we wouldn't have gotten out alive. After that, we never went to such dangerous places again, and Simon was never the same. Every time I try to bring it up, he completely loses his temper and tries to change the subject. What did he see? Maybe he's right. Maybe we're just not meant to know.